Committee will now come to order. We are convened as of 12 p.m. I would respectfully ask everyone attending this meeting to mute yourself unless you are recognized to speak. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. Please note that committee meetings of the RTD Board of Directors will be held remotely via Zoom and will be audio and video recorded. The meeting recordings, along with the unofficial minutes of the meetings, will be posted as soon as practicable on the board's website. During today's meeting, we are also providing communication access real-time translation, also known as CART. Anyone who would like to access this service should send an email to the RTD board office at rtd.boardoffice@rtd-denver.com, and a link will be provided. Additionally, the CART transcript can be automatically translated into Spanish for anyone who would like to access to the transcript of this meeting in Spanish. A live stream of this meeting is also available via RTD's YouTube page. I would now like to call the roll for the committee members. Busick.
Here.
Chair Davidson.
Here.
Director Geisinger.
It looks like she's just popping on, Director Catlin.
Yeah, I see that she is. Director Geisinger?
I'm here.
Okay. Director Guzman? I do not see Director Guzman.
Director Guzman is, I think he is likely in transit. His shift ended a little earlier this morning.
Okay, if you would, for the record, let me know when he joins, I would appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Director Lewis?
Present.
Director Tisdale?
Present.
And I am Chair Catlin, and I am here. So for the record, I see that we have 6 directors present and 1 absent pending. I would like to open public comment to anyone who would like to address the committee regarding any topic listed in the published meeting agenda for the current and immediately preceding month. If you wish to speak and have not already done so, please either raise your virtual hand or press *9 on your phone. During this time, the committee will not offer any direct comments or responses. However, if you would like to be contacted regarding your public comment, please email the RTD board office at rtd.boardoffice@rtd-denver.com. Mr. Kroll, are there any hands raised?
Director Catlin, we have a number of folks here from the public, including, it appears, a representative from Channel 7 Denver News, but no one who has raised their hand in desire to provide public comment.
Well, thank you for noting that. Now I would like to ask if there are any emails that were received.
Yes, Director Catlin, Executive Manager Jack Kroll, again here. There were no emails received in advance of this meeting that were submitted as public comment.
Thank you, Mr. Kroll. So with no participants in the queue, we will close the public comment period at this time. We have 1 recommended action for today's meeting. That is approval of 2024 General Manager and CEO's performance appraisal and related compensation change. This is for the Board of Directors to approve General Manager and CEO Deborah A. Johnson's attached performance appraisal for the 2024 calendar year performance cycle, and in connection therewith to approve a 4.86% increase to the GM CEO's current annual base salary. Do I have a motion?
So moved, Lewis.
Second, Busick.
So I have Director Lewis as the movement and Director Busick as the second. I would like to ask Director Davidson if he has anything further to add. I would like to speak briefly that we had a meeting this previous Monday with the board and GM CEO Johnson to discuss this, and the board members had an opportunity to change their performance rating. So those were finalized on Tuesday afternoon. I would like to ask Board Chair Eric Davidson if he has anything further to add.
Thank you very much, Committee Chair Catlin. First of all, I just would like to thank the board for participating in the evaluation process. As the packet notes on packet page 5, we did have 14 raters from the board responding to a comprehensive questionnaire. And I thank everybody for their participation in that, and thank the general manager and CEO for her participation in the evaluation process as well, and certainly for her work over the previous performance period over this past year. I would just like to note, I think that the framework worked very well for us this year. We had adjusted the way we did the performance evaluation to really factor in core-based job performance of the general manager and CEO, as well as attainment of short-term or annual goals that were measured. And we used a number-based system that again appears on packet page 5. And would just like to highlight, I think we've done a lot of good work as a team to align around a performance framework that also well aligns with the work that's being done in the agency, and would certainly like to thank our Chief People Officer, Charlene Pelleggi, for her collaboration and partnership in working to have alignment with the performance feedback that the board is using for the general manager and CEO, and how that aligns across the organization. And just would comment that, we have 3 tiers that appeared in this framework of does not meet expectations, meets expectations, and exceeds expectations, with meets expectations really being the target, with fully meeting being satisfactory performance. And I'd like to thank the general manager and CEO for her performance over the previous year. As noted by Committee Chair Catlin, we've had opportunities to discuss performance with the general manager and CEO, but would certainly like to highlight that the board is finding, using a point-based system, 67 out of 100 points, putting her squarely in meeting expectations. I think to highlight some of the short-term SMART goals on the Back to Basics initiative. I thank the general manager and CEO for her meeting of expectations and even exceeding of expectations on that goal. That was a goal which we said we would complete the first phase of the downtown rail reconstruction project by September 30th, 2024, and have had a plan to do so. And in a time when many public works projects go above their budget and beyond their time, it was a very significant success that this agency, under the leadership of General Manager and CEO Johnson, delivered on that project ahead of time and on budget within expectations. In the area of people power, the board set a goal in collaboration with General Manager and CEO Johnson regarding reducing improving the employee retention rate. And although the performance metric that we set forward was not fully met, and thereby this was a partially met, I'd like to acknowledge that the spirit of this goal was to restore workforce so that we can restore service. And we have made tremendous strides in that area, have a significant service restoration coming in January. However, this was a partially meet expectations, given that we didn't meet exactly the retention goals we meant to. And I look forward to seeing what additional goals and strategic initiatives come forward to further improve our retention efforts and further restore our workforce at the agency. We had another short-term goal, which was in the area of welcoming transit environment. This was where the general manager and CEO committed to vigorously pursue passage of legislation regarding enhanced penalties for assaults on transit workers to really protect and improve the personal security of our frontline employees. And also this goal included developing a project plan to secure the perimeter of at least one of our operational facilities and implement those enhancements by November. We did complete that perimeter security, and that was a fully meeting expectations, and certainly would like to thank the general manager for that. The partially meets in this particular goal was that legislation was not passed in the past legislative session on looking at additional penalties or protections for frontline employees. However, I think I speak for the board. Certainly, I'll speak for myself in saying that I appreciate very much that through the advocacy of this agency, a conversation has started at the legislature around an interest in looking at what might be possible to further protect frontline employees. So I think that is in large part thanks to the advocacy of the agency, and look forward to how future goals shape around that. On the area of core base job performance, the board found the general manager and CEO to be fully meeting expectations. I think that's certainly in line with my experience here, and thank the general manager for a great deal of work in the agency. Especially, I would note areas around our budgeting process, moving to a more deliberate budget that is well aligned with our strategic initiatives and plans, and focuses on what's needed to accomplish the goals we set forward, rather than just defaulting to where operational budgets were. I think this is an area the agency is seeing some tremendous change, and there's been great improvement. This year also saw some successful new implementations of Agency First. One of those was our Zero Fare for Youth program being locked in, and the successful rollout of the first fare reduction in agency history that was led by General Manager and CEO Johnson, and went off very smoothly and was well adopted by the public. We certainly had our challenges this year, perhaps most notably, while we were very successful on our planned maintenance of the downtown rail reconstruction project, we struggled with the unplanned work that resulted in slow zones throughout the summer. And I would note that there are areas and growth opportunities for the agency to improve the proactive nature by which, as our system ages, we communicate what that aging system looks like and work together with the community to make sure we're all on the same page about what's happening. But I certainly do thank our team and our general manager and CEO Johnson for quickly adapting, putting forward a public-facing webpage to provide updates. Certainly some learning for the region as we move from a younger system to an older system. So certainly there are opportunities to improve, but I think we've seen a very strong performance by our general manager and CEO, hence the finding of the 67 points using the rubric that we designed in the framework that was adopted by Performance Committee in last year. So thank you for the opportunity to provide those comments. That summarizes what I see from the board and some of my own comments as well. Thank you, Chair Catlin.
Thank you, Chair Davidson. And in my haste to move this meeting along, I neglected to say a few things. But first, I wanted to acknowledge that Director Guzman and Director Bouquet both joined this this meeting at approximately 12:05, and we appreciate your joining us today. So as you may recall, we did agree to the performance assessment framework in January of 2024, and the vote that we will conduct today is directly tied to that framework that we adopted. And I want to thank as well the many staff who participated in this, including Chief People Officer Charlene Pelleggi, General Counsel Snyder, Executive Business Partner John McKay, and the consultants we partnered this year at RKL. I do want to thank GM CEO Johnson as well for her work this year. This job has been incredibly challenging, and this has been a very challenging year. And we believe that the GM CEO firmly met the board's high expectations during the evaluation period. And I'd like to point out that as Chief People Officer Pelleggi points out to me, the fully meets expectations is really what is desired of every employee at RTD, and General Manager CEO Johnson certainly has met those expectations. So at this time, I'd like to ask any other directors who have questions or wish to speak, raise your virtual hands and I'll call on you in turn. And at this point, I see Director Lewis has his hands raised. Director Lewis, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a few comments. Also adding on to what Eric was saying, the LIVE program has also been very successful this year, providing low-income people a chance to pay 1/2 of the fare. The 19 and under has actually lowered truancies at schools. So just wanted to make sure those two things were highlighted. Just also want to remind people too that this job, there's only a handful of people that can handle this job in the United States. And I think Deborah has done an outstanding job and look forward to seeing her continue that work. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Lewis. Director Tisdale, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I appreciate the opportunity to have this annual checking in with our general manager, and I very much appreciate and applaud the idea that we will have more direct contact with the general manager going forward, perhaps on a quarterly basis, doing similar things, because I think it's very helpful for both the board and for the general manager CEO. I understand that we've proceeded according to what we approved in January, and so therefore that's how we should proceed. I do have a question just because I couldn't understand the explanation on packet page 5 relative to how the math was done. It's a minor point, but I would appreciate if we could at least articulate if we have a score of 67 and we have a range of 3.25% to 5.99% for that block in terms of meets. How do you calculate to come up with the 4.9%, 4.86 that we did? Thank you.
Thank you, Director Tisdale, and that has been a discussion that has occurred among other board members as recently as this morning. And Director Davidson did a fairly detailed analysis of the math, and I'm going to yield the floor to him to explain the methodology. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Catlin, and thank you, Director Tisdale, for the important question. So as directors will recall, in the adopted framework with the 7th Amendment, 6th and 7th Amendments to the General Manager and CEO's contract, and pursuant to our compensation analyses where we're operating on data, we set the adjusted base salary running between 1% and 7%. And then that was done on a tiered system, which appears as noted by Director Tisdale on page 5, and essentially works somewhat like a progressive tax system in that there are the operating within the range. So for example, the 0 to 49 point range, that corresponds to a 2.24% increase between 1 to 3.24. So if you were to do a table, and Director Tisdale and other directors, I'm happy to share with you some of the documents that I have in calculating some of this. But if you were to literally put out a table of 0 points, 1 point, 2 point, 3 point, as you move through that first tier, each respective point is worth 0.0457%. And that's just by taking those 49 points and doing a division of that available 2.24%. Then once you hit 50 points, that is now at 3.25%. And the difference between 5.99% and 3.25%, you essentially take that relative percentage increase and divide out the points, which in this case is 29 in that tier. So each point within that tier, and forgive the precise number here, but is equates to 0.0457%. So essentially each additional point now, like a tiered tax system or progressive tax system, is adding those respective amounts. And then if we were to move into the 80-point range, there again, there is a different percentage. So rather than applying 67% across the total range, it's really using that tiered system and doing linear math in between each of those tiers. Director Tisdale, does that answer your question? And Chair Catlin, does that answer the question at hand?
Madam Chair, if I may.
Please.
Thank you. Yes, it answers the question. I might have a different view on how that could or should be done, but close enough for government work. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Chair Davidson. And I had forgotten that we had this somewhat weighted sliding scale until you shared your spreadsheet with me earlier, and I appreciate that. It is very complicated, and perhaps in the next year, we might want to revisit that for simplicity. But I'll just leave it. It is what it is at this point. So are there any other questions going forward? I don't see any other hands raised, so at this time I would like to call for the vote. Are there any no votes on this action? So with 7 aye votes and 0 no votes and 0 abstentions, that motion passes. And this will be forwarded, as I understand it, to the full board for adoption at the board meeting on December 3rd. Are there any other matters to discuss? Well, then, our next meeting date is scheduled for Monday, December 2nd at 8:30 a.m. This meeting will include discussions related to key organizational performance metrics and the GM CEO's 2025 goals. We had a good discussion at a previous performance committee meeting with GM CEO Johnson regarding kind of a broader scope or a broader discussion of goals and with this committee, and I have encouraged other directors to submit some of their objectives for the following year so that we can finalize the goal setting in January with the newly seated board. So with no further discussion for agenda items, the meeting is adjourned as of 12:21. And at this time, I'd like a 5-minute break prior to convening the executive committee. So that will be at approximately 12:27 p.m. Thank you all for your participation, and we'll take a 5-minute break.
Thank you, everybody. I'll give a 1-minute warning before we start executive.
And if we can just pause the recording team. Great.
Everyone, we're going to get started in just about another minute. If you can hear me. Let's not start quite yet, but this is just about a 30-second warning here. If folks can get audio and cameras back on, we will have quite a bit to get through here. Jack, good estimate on the time. Okay, see everyone's back up. Let's go ahead and start the recording. Good afternoon, everyone. The Thursday, November 21st Executive Committee will now come to order. We are convened as of 12:28 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. I would respectfully ask everyone attending this meeting to please mute yourself unless you're recognized to speak. This committee meeting, along with other committee meetings of the RTD Board of Directors, is being held remotely via Zoom and is audio and video recorded. The meeting recordings, along with the unofficial minutes of the meetings, will be posted as soon as practicable on the board's website. During today's meeting, we are also providing communication access real-time translation, also known as CART, and anyone who would like to access this CART service can send an email to the RTD board office using the email address rtd.boardoffice@rtd-denver.com, and a link will be provided. Additionally, the CART transcript can be automatically translated into Spanish for anyone who would like access to a live transcript of this meeting in Spanish. A live stream of this meeting is also available via RTD's YouTube page. I will now call the roll for the committee members. First, Vice Chair Catlin.
Here.
Second, Vice Chair Geisinger.
Here.
Secretary Guzman.
Here.
Treasurer Bouquet.
Present.
And this is Chair Davidson speaking. I am also present. That is all 5 committee members present. I note for the sake of the record, we are also joined by Director Tisdale and Director Lewis. Thank you for being here, gentlemen. We'll now move to the public comment section of our agenda. I'll open up public comment to anyone who would like to address the committee regarding any topic listed in the published meeting agenda for the current and immediately preceding month. If you wish to speak and have not done so, you may raise your virtual hand, or if dialed in by phone, you can press *9. During this time, the committee does not offer any direct comments or responses, although we welcome anyone who would like to be contacted regarding their comment to email the RTD board office at the email address rtd.boardoffice@rtd-denver.com. Mr. Kroll, do we have any hands raised at this time?
Chair Davidson, this is Jack Kroll, Executive Manager of the Board Office. While we are still joined by several members of the public from our last meeting, we do not have anyone present here who has raised their hand to indicate their desire to provide public comment.
Thank you, Mr. Kroll. And for the sake of the record, can you read in as to whether we received any public emailed comments for today's meeting?
Yes, Committee Chair Davidson, no emailed comments were received in advance of this meeting that were submitted as public comment for this meeting.
Thank you very much, sir. Seeing no participants in the queue and noting no comments received via email, we will now close the public comment period at this time and move to our recommended actions. There are 5 recommended actions this afternoon. Our time is a bit tight when we have several members that have hard stops around 2 p.m. So just wanted to note that I will do my best here to work efficiently. As a reminder for the committee staff and anyone watching and or listening to the meeting, any action that is passed through the executive committee, even if the vote is unanimous, will be included on the board agenda under recommended actions as opposed to the unanimous consent, so that the full board will have an opportunity to discuss the measure presented. With that being stated and noted, the first action under consideration by the committee is item A. This is the 2025 Legislative and Government Relations Program. This is for the Board of Directors to adopt the 2025 Legislative and Government Relations Program. Do I have a motion?
So moved, Guzman.
Second, Bouquet.
I have the move into Guzman, the second as Bouquet. And with that, I'd like to first open up the floor to Mr. Michael Davies, our Government Relations Officer, to present this item. Please go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Chair and members of the committee. Michael Davies, Government Relations Officer. I'm here to present the recommended action to approve the 2025 Legislative and Government Relations Program. Given that this committee has received a presentation from me last month as a discussion item on this, I won't go into depth, but I will simply end there and see if there is any questions.
I'm going to see if there's any questions at this time. Mr. Davies, I'll start by saying thank you for the discussion that you did provide to us. They are some great questions, I think, good discussion around what will be possible. I know it's going to be another busy year for you, so thank you for organizing all that. Are there any questions from directors at this time? Okay, seeing none. Mr. Davies, thank you for being here. I'll call for the vote and ask, are there any no votes on this action? Seeing none, with the movement is Guzman, the second is Bouquet. That will pass with 5 yes votes, 0 no, and 0 abstentions. Once again, Mr. Davies, thanks for the organization. Tremendously appreciate the way we're approaching government relations by adopting these programs in advance of the session. Thank you, sir. With that, we will now move to our next recommended action. This is item B, the Independent Audit Committee membership appointment, reappointment, and authorization. This is for the Board of Directors to take the following actions related to membership on the Independent Audit Committee. First, appoint Director Busick to a term commencing January 1st, 2025 and expiring December 31st, 2026. Second, to reappoint external member Jim Brendel to a term commencing January 1st, 2025 and expiring December 31st, 2026. And finally, to authorize former Director Deschel to remain on the committee through November 17th, 2025. Do I have a motion?
So move, Bouquet.
Second.
I have the movement as Bouquet, the second as Geisinger. At this time, I'll go ahead and ask if there are any comments, and I'll offer some as well after these two. But first, would like to see if Mr. Jack Kroll, our Executive Manager of the Board Office, or if Mr. Doug McLeod, our Chief Financial Officer, had anything he'd like to add. But Mr. Kroll, I believe you've been coordinating with him, so I'm going to hand off to you and see if there's anything you'd like to add.
Yes, first I just need to correct the record. Unfortunately, there was an error in the board report here, and this is my fault. I had a habit, unfortunately, of mixing up Jim Brendel and John Ohlenberger's name as I was developing this. John Ohlenberger is actually the the current external member who is in need of reappointment to the committee. So if the record could simply just reflect that the action would be to appoint Director Busick, reappoint external member John Ohlenberger, and authorize Director Deschel to remain on the committee. Mr. Brendel, for the record, has a term that will expire at the end of next year. All right, sorry for that mistake, but otherwise, the only other thing I want to point out here is that Director Deschel had resigned from the board effective November 17th. However, according to your audit committee charter, this appears on packet page 15. He is eligible to remain on the committee if he is interested and the board agrees to. So that's the only thing that's a little bit unique in this process.
Thank you, Mr. Kroll, for adding that, and thank you for noting the error. And apologies for missing that as well as going through this. And we will let the record reflect that we would be reappointing external member John Ohlenberger to a term commencing January 1st, 2025 and expiring December 31st, 2026. I will just offer, first of all, that the folks who have stepped up to serve on this committee have my tremendous thanks. Certainly Director Catlin and Director Deschel, and our external members, Mr. Jim Brendel and Mr. John Ohlenberger, who have brought a lot of expertise and help. I just would remind and note for the record that one of the discussions back when we had the ad hoc audit committee and were designing and reinventing both the audit committee and the internal audit function, a key problem we were solving for was ensuring that we had expertise on the committee and that we had the experience of being on the board on the committee and retained institutional knowledge. Hence, we used 2-year terms. We added external members with audit expertise, and we also did provide the opportunity for a board member, if they were in the middle of their 2-year appointment, when rolling off the board, to seek and then be confirmed by the board, continuing out the remainder of that term. And I think I speak for many of us when I thank Director Deschel for his willingness to fill in that role. He has my full support in doing that. I do think that that helps us retain our institutional knowledge in this committee, and believe that just would like to highlight, since I will not be here, there's going to be some important work to be done next year as we consider additional members that will be rolling on and how we really continue to solve for that problem of preserving that expertise and that experience on the committee. And thank Director Busick for raising his hand and his interest to join as well. So with that being noted, are there any other questions or comments from directors or any members of staff? All right. Oh, Secretary Guzman, please go ahead, sir.
Just a quick one. Anticipating that further training and knowledge learning will need to be done going into future years to meet the expectation that has been set by the charter. Is there a plan on our end to ensure that directors who might be interested in doing audit work can receive the proper education, proper training to be able to continue that work?
Thank you for the question, Secretary. I saw Mr. Kroll's hand go up. Please go ahead, sir.
Yeah, so Director Guzman, as you are intimately familiar with the training, the board orientation, onboarding, and continuing education training policy, the board has outlined an expectation that board members be trained on the audit committee's function in that. I think what your question is driving at is, okay, it's one thing to understand what the audit committee does and its purpose. It's another thing to bring the skill sets to the table. And I think that can be reflected. This is something I was going to touch on under other matters if time allowed. But I'll briefly mention that policy also calls for a annual board assessment to be completed, in which we are going to ask directors what skill sets and what knowledge they feel like the board collectively has, and use that to identify areas for continuing education. So while it's not a direct plan to educate folks with the skills necessary to perform the audit function at its highest level, it is a window for us to gain those insights and plan accordingly if the board is considering itself lacking in any given area, let alone this one that you raised.
Thank you, Mr. Kroll, and thank you, Secretary. I will also note, just in adding on to that, that I would encourage directors to participate in those meetings who might be interested, also to engage with current committee members. And furthermore, a resource that is available within the board office is the Institute of Internal Auditors, or IIA, produces what's colloquially referred to as the Red Book. This is more specifically the International Professional Practices Framework, or IPPF. And I think that certainly at a minimum, it is helpful to be very familiar with that as an audit committee member, having read through that. And then there are resources available through the IIA. So I would submit that as something for consideration for the board as it refines its training practices in the year and years ahead. Any further questions or comments on this? All right, not seeing any, I will call for the vote. Are there any no votes on this action? Okay, seeing none, that will also pass with 5 yes votes, 0 no, and 0 abstentions. Thank you very much. And again, thanks for all those who are serving on that committee, and to our staff for leaning in and engaging on a very still nascent but well-developing process for internal audit. We'll now move on to our next recommended action. This is item C. This is a bylaw amendments to update descriptions of the executive and performance committees. This is for the board of directors to adopt the proposed bylaw amendments, which will clarify the roles of the executive and performance committees, as well as adjust several related administrative matters. Do I have a motion?
So moved, Guzman.
Second, Catlin.
The movement as Guzman, the second as Catlin. Before opening up for discussion and questions, I again will ask if our executive manager of the board office, Jack Kroll, has any comments, and thank him for his leadership and help in looking at and updating our bylaws and making adjustments to both match current practices, desired practices, and those that we had committed to with the Office of the State Auditor as well. So thank you for your work, sir. I'll open up the floor to you first to see if there's anything you would like to present and highlight.
Thank you, Chair Davidson. As introduced, this is Jack Kroll, Executive Manager of the Board Office. One of the things that happened with this item is that it was scheduled for discussion at last month's meeting. That is typical of our board, given our board operating guidelines, that we usually bring items of significant policy or governance importance twice. Once as a discussion and once as an action item. However, time was short at last month's meeting as well. And so I just want to highlight one thing here specifically that changed between when this was presented as a draft and when this is coming back to you now as an action item. The board office solicited additional feedback from members of the board as to whether to set specific hard times for the performance committee and the audit committee. More specifically, currently finance and planning, operations, safety and security, and executive committee have specific meeting cadences and times that are delineated in the bylaws, and the performance and the internal audit committee did not. And the feedback that we received was in the camp that the performance committee should settle in on its current practice and just set that cadence and timing in stone in the bylaws, that the committee meeting would start at 8:30 a.m. on the first Monday of each month. The internal audit committee, where that is left at, is I think we need some additional input from the internal audit committee itself before we set something down specifically there. Now, just a quick highlight of some of the changes in here that were included last month, but we didn't get a chance to discuss. Several items under the executive committee's purview that were actually describing powers and duties of the chair were simply moved to that section that describes the powers and duties of the chair. That's less of a substantive change and more of just a administrative change. Additionally, though, the executive committee has some specific responsibilities added to its bailiwick. I think most significantly is overseeing the internal governance of the board. While that has been an internal practice of ours, I think it's important for the board to specifically call out and note which committee on the board is responsible for handling board governance. And so that's, I think, a key change with respect to the executive committee's description. And then real quickly with respect to the performance committee's description, this, as Chair Davidson noted, was in direct response to some of the feedback the agency received and committed to addressing in the Office of the State Auditor's performance audit that was released earlier this year. And I think those changes there are pretty self-explanatory. And in the red line version, they appear on page 32 of your packet. And so with that, that's all I wanted to highlight, and I'm happy to yield the floor and take any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kroll. I'll just emphasize for members of the committee and the board that some of these changes on the executive committee side, as noted by Mr. Kroll, are already really it's encompassing some current practices, but it's somewhat of a way to emphasize the committee's roles and responsibilities in terms of owning governance, owning its budget, planning the retreats, all those types of things that we do today. But serving two purposes as solidifying that in the bylaws, but also then reminding the committee. And I again thank Mr. Kroll for helping accomplish that, and also identifying the areas where we had some things in not the wrong section, but maybe not the ideal section. Any questions or comments from directors? Yes, Secretary Guzman, please.
I'm not going to object to it going forward. I just want to know if there is a logic behind having a Monday morning meeting for performance issues rather than having one either on another day of the week. If it's just timing, 8:30 a.m. on Monday mornings can be kind of rough when you're coming back from a weekend, and have quite a bit of work to catch up on to focus on issues of performance. And so I'm just curious how that came to be. I mean, even today, I'll admit, right? I worked my morning shift this morning and had difficulty logging into the meeting, and it was an hour later than we had planned. And it's just a Monday, right? And so I'm just questioning the logic behind putting it on a Monday when it might be beneficial to move it to a Tuesday or later in the week when we might have a more productive discussion. I'm not opposed, just curious.
I'll be happy to start, and then I'll hand off to you, Mr. Kroll, because you solicited some feedback. I think in large part, this was seeking that we needed to embrace something. And given that this had been the practice this year, that members of staff, most notably General Manager and CEO Johnson, who needs to participate in these performance meetings, has this as a standing meeting, or at least has allocated the time, I should say, but we haven't created that standing practice the way we have with executive committee, which is also during the day, or the other committees in the evenings, and making something standing and putting that in line with current practice seemed like the most reasonable way to get commitment on that. As with any of these, it can be revisited, but doing so would require an upfront commitment. And the point being that at least for a foreseeable time horizon, there is a commitment that directors and staff have made together. Regarding the specific time and current practice, Mr. Kroll, if there's anything you wanted to highlight in terms of feedback that you received as you were working on this final draft, please go ahead and share that.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Davidson. The only thing I would add to that is that this gives the board some diversity of timing. I think it's often assumed that board members have kind of had that traditional 8 to 5 p.m. Employment situation, but that's really not the case, at least as far as the universe of people who could come onto the board. And so giving folks a diversity of options. This also cements the practice that's been in place for the last 2 years for this committee meeting, and that has appeared to work well. The board office does circulate draft board meeting dates and times, and we have not received any feedback to the contrary that time or date was not working well for folks. And it does indeed, as Chair Davidson pointed out, work well for the GM and CEO to make that happen.
Thank you, Mr. Kroll. Secretary, does that answer your questions?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions or discussion? Okay, seeing none. Thank you very much, everybody, for reviewing this as Mr. Kroll had sent out. I'll go ahead and call for the vote. Are there any no votes? Seeing and hearing none, that will also pass with 5 yes votes, 0 no, and 0 abstention. Thank you very much, everybody, for continued refinement and improvement on our bylaws. We'll go to our 4th recommended action for consideration. This is item D, the Citizen Advisory Committee, or CAC, appointments and reappointments. This is for the Board of Directors to appoint 3 new members to 3-year terms, appoint 5 new members to 2-year terms, and reappoint 2 members to another 3-year term. Do I have a motion?
So moved, Bouquet.
A second?
Second.
I have the move into as Bouquet, the second as Geisinger. And again, thank you for joining us and being prepared to engage quite a bit in the committee today, Mr. Kroll. Our board office executive manager, Jack Kroll, thank you for your leadership in pulling together these appointments and reappointments. Please go ahead and present the work and anything you'd like to address on this item.
Thank you, Chair Davidson. Again, Jack Kroll, Executive Manager of the Board Office here. To start, the board acted earlier this year to approve the CAC's charter. This was in feedback that the board received from the CAC that outlined, a desire to recommit to the CAC and to revisit its role and purpose. And with that in the rearview mirror, Chair Davidson issued a call earlier this fall for the committee to work with the board office to solicit members. We had tremendous support from across the agency, and our communications and engagement team here did a great job of promoting the opportunity to apply for the CAC. And we received 34 applications from almost every district in the agency's footprint, provided at least one applicant. A nominating committee that was comprised of the several members of the current CAC, as well as directors Bouquet and Lewis and myself, met, discussed a very highly qualified application pool. We had to make some challenging decisions along the way, but we believe and are confident that we're forwarding to the board right now a slate of nominees that is diverse in its background, diverse in its geographic representation, and passionate about bringing solid and invaluable feedback to this agency. The board report contains brief descriptions on each one of the nominees that is being recommended, and I'm happy to answer any questions and perhaps suggest to the chair that if Treasurer Bouquet has anything to add about his time on the nominating committee, that we hear from him as well.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Kroll. And was planning to open up here. And first of all, just thank Director Lewis and Treasurer Bouquet for their work on this as well. I know it takes time and patience. I think Treasurer Bouquet, you've done this twice now. We did this together a couple of years ago. And thank you for stepping up, both of you, to do this and evaluate this. If either Director Lewis or Treasurer Bouquet have any comments to make about the process and about the nominees, I'd certainly love to hear so at this time. And I see Treasurer Bouquet, your hand is up. Please go ahead.
Yeah, am I coming through okay?
You are. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Sorry, I had a little internet issues earlier on. Yeah, I just wanted to give a big shout out to Mr. Kroll for all the work that he's done, as well as Peak Consulting Group for helping us out, as well as Director Lewis and everyone involved when it came down to it. I've done this several times now when it comes down to selecting CAC members, and I will say that we had a great amount of applicants this go around, and there was some, difficulty of picking who our finalists would be. But I would say that I look forward to the nominees serving on the CAC. I think they're going to do an excellent job. And yeah, a lot of talented folks coming from a lot of backgrounds, and those who are connected with transit, either through their work or, most importantly, being riders. So thank you for all that helped out in the process, and looking forward to these CAC nominees being passed along. So thank you.
Thank you, Treasurer. I'm glad to hear that. Thank you very much. And I see Director Lewis's hand is up. Thank you for stepping up as well. Please go ahead and make any comments you'd like to share.
Yeah, just to reiterate, we had a fantastic source of people, variety of backgrounds. I just wanted to say that it was really great to see our staff be able to, get the word out about the CAC, but I hope we kind of give that same effort to start stocking our ACPD and APEC committees. I know they also have people, rolling off those committees. So I hope we can put the same effort into getting those committees up to their proper numbers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director Lewis. I appreciate it. Great comments and here. And Mr. Kroll, thank you for tremendous work getting the word out. I think the work that you did on the front end of this is why we had a good number of applicants here, and that's a good problem to have. So thank you. I'll open up for discussion or questions from any directors committee and none, and I'll just start by calling on the hands I see, starting with committee members. I see First Vice Chair Catlin has her hand raised. First Vice Chair Catlin, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to comment on the caliber of the selected members. I was really impressed with not only the diversity of experience and expertise, but just across the board diversity for the region. So kudos to Directors Bouquet and Lewis for their good work in the selection of these committees members. The new ones is what I'm really commenting on, but the existing committee members have also provided a great service. And I think we have really elevated the role of this committee in the agency. It originally started as a Fast Tracks Advisory Committee, and it's really evolved into something much more collaborative and substantial. So thank you all.
Thank you very much, First Vice Chair Catlin. Again, here. This was a great slate and of candidates and our nominees, and really appreciate the work there. Other questions or comments from directors? Director Lewis, I see your hand is raised, but I'm guessing that's just residual from your comments earlier. Thank you, sir. Any further comments or questions? Okay, wonderful. Well, once again, thank you so much. It's my pleasure to call for the vote on this one. Are there any no votes on this action? All right, with the movement as Bouquet and the second is Geisinger, I see no votes. That will be 5 yes votes, 0 no, and 0 abstentions. Thank you. We look forward to bringing this to the full board and then welcoming some new members to the CAC and thanking those that will be continuing. We'll now move to our final recommended action for the committee's consideration this afternoon. This is item E, the transit passes for former directors. This is for the board of directors to build upon, ratify, and reaffirm the existing agency practice to provide annual transit passes to all former board of directors and a designated immediate family member by adopting the enclosed resolution establishing the right of all former directors and a designated immediate family member to receive an annual pass in perpetuity. Do I hear a motion?
So moved, Guzman.
And a second?
Second, Bouquet.
I have the movement as Guzman, the second as Bouquet. Now, given that this is coming forward to the board as a director-initiated action, which has been led by Director Tisdale, I would like to open the floor to Director Tisdale first to please present this item before any further discussions or questions. Director Tisdale, please go ahead, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'll be brief. The material is set forth in the board report. For the sake of clarity, there are actually 12 sponsors of this recommended action out of the 14 members of the board. And I think it, as it states, is simply a ratification and reaffirmation of a practice that RTD has had in place for as many years as the memory of man runneth to the contrary not. That's an old law school expression. But anyway, so I'd be happy to respond to any questions.
Thank you, Director Tisdale, for being here and for preparing this and for noting the 12 directors bringing this item forward. We'll now open up for any questions or comments from any present directors. Secretary Guzman, please.
I just wanted to say thank you to Director Tisdale and Director Busick for taking this on and preparing it. I appreciate it. That's all.
Thank you, Secretary. First Vice Chair Catlin, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Directors Tisdale and Busick. I wanted to make a comment that not only is it common practice, but when I was recruited to apply for an appointment and subsequently a run for election, it was not only a practice, but it was a promise. They told me the board office told me at that time, you know, if you get on the board, then you will get a transit a transit pass. I did not know that it had not been memorialized into the policy. So I appreciate that that was unearthed, Director Tisdale and Director Busick, because it was my understanding when I got on the board that this was because it was a supplement to our salary, actually, that it was a nice benefit for having served. So I just wanted to applaud you all. But I think there was an understanding from a number of board members that this was in place and it didn't necessarily need to be memorialized, but I'm glad it will be. Thank you.
Thank you, First Vice Chair Catlin. Any further questions or comments from directors? I have one I'll offer. I thank you, Director Tisdale, for highlighting that it was not memorialized, as First Vice Chair Catlin noted, and for bringing it forward. I'll share that my hope for this in this position is that this can be a means to which to attract folks who highly value this transit system, who leverage the transit system, and that aside from the stipend, which is set legislatively, that what can be done within RTD, this can be an incentive for those who really value and take advantage of RTD's services and bring the experience of riding the system into the boardroom. So thank you for presenting us the opportunity to take ownership of that and put that forward and put policy in place and to not fall back simply on practice, which I think we've done a number of things like that this year. So appreciate those opportunities to refine. Not seeing any further comments, I'll go ahead and call for the vote. Are there any no votes from the committee on this action? Seeing none, that will also pass with 5 yes votes, 0 no, and 0 abstentions, with the movement as Guzman and the second as Bouquet. Thank you very much, everybody, for your work on that. At this time, we'll now move to the next portion of our agenda. This is the December board meeting agenda review. Is there a motion to approve the board meeting agenda for our meeting on Tuesday, December 3rd?
So moved, Guzman.
I have a second.
Second.
I have the movement as Guzman, the second as Catlin. This is a full agenda, but quite straightforward. I know we've had a couple of executive committees recently. We've had to make some notes about the agendas. I have no notes at this time, so I'll go ahead and open for if there's any questions or discussion on the agenda. And any directors welcome to raise their hand. First call on Director Lewis, please. Thank you for joining us, and please go ahead.
Yes, at our last full board meeting, the subject of Greyhound station lease had come up, and I was under the impression that was going to be a discussion item for our December meeting.
I see that. Thank you, Director Lewis. I see General Manager and CEO Johnson has raised her hand, so I'll go ahead and hand it over to you, Ms. Johnson.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. As introduced, Deborah Johnson, General Manager and CEO. It was my intent to provide an update, having spoke with Executive Manager of the Board Office, Jack Kroll. We're going to incorporate that, and I would do that just in my section whereby I would do the General Manager and CEO report.
Thank you for clarifying that, General Manager and CEO Johnson. And just for clarity on the record, that would be to hear the update during the General Manager and CEO's report. Director Lewis, does that address your question?
No, it does not, because a discussion item is different from the CEO Johnson from making her comments. So, it cannot be fit on the December agenda. I'd like to see it on the January agenda, if that's possible.
Thank you, Director Lewis. Before making any further comments on that myself, I see that General Manager and CEO Johnson's hand is up. Please go ahead, Ms. Johnson.
Mr. Chair, thank you once again, Deborah Johnson. I'm amenable either way. I just wanted to state that for the record, recognizing that it was inadvertently omitted. I was trying to offer up an alternative, but I'm amenable either way. I will defer to this committee to decide what the course of action will be. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. I'll offer the comment that when the general manager and CEO has provided a report, there are sometimes times that we have taken questions, sometimes that we have not. And I think that's just a byproduct of when there are questions about the report. I would anticipate there may be some questions pursuant to our update. I would ask General Manager and CEO Johnson if you're amenable to entertaining some questions after you provide your General Manager and CEO report, and that if we are tight on time, then we could revisit if the questions are not well addressed at that time. Would that be something you'd be open to?
Mr. Chair, yes, most definitely.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. So, Director Lewis, would that be amenable that we will pause for questions after the General Manager and CEO's report so that any input or questions can be addressed? And then if they are not fully addressed and there are remaining concerns from board directors, we can agendize it at a future meeting. Does that work for you, sir?
I agree. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Lewis. Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Next, I see Director Tisdale's hand raised. You are now recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. In reviewing the agenda, I noted one thing that is not mentioned that I had thought we were going to hear in December. And specifically, it relates to the Fleet and Facilities Transition Plan. It was on October the 12th, 2023, that the Operations Committee approved a $10 million contract for work to commence in September 2023 and to conclude by December 2024. It was discussed in detail and approved by the full board on April the 25th of 2023. And for the sake of the record, I actually voted no on that resolution. But we are now in December, presumably have spent $10 million, and I was hoping before I left that I would see the Fleet and Facilities Transition Plan. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, thank you, Director Tisdale. And it's a great question. Thank you for raising that. I'll call on General Manager and CEO Johnson to provide an update and some context in terms of where that will be agendized. So Ms. Johnson, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Deborah Johnson, General Manager and CEO. For the record, the item that Director Tisdale is referencing is the Facilities Fleet and Transition Plan, because the emphasis is on the facilities, as that has been an obstacle in reference to basically being able to adopt alternative fuel technology as relates to propulsion systems of our revenue vehicles. With that being said, at the meeting that took place just on November 13th, we had Assistant General Manager Fred Worthen and our WSP partners provide an in-depth presentation relative to the Facilities and Fleet Transition Plan and where we stood, recognizing that the deliverable is to have the Facilities and Fleet Transition Plan provided to this organization on December 13th. The nature of providing that information during the course of that meeting was to acclimate all parties relative to the status of such efforts that have been undertaken. With that as the backdrop, the plan is to be disseminated to all board members. If it's this body's desire to hear the presentation once again, recognizing those materials were disseminated to the full board with the complete packet, then apprise me accordingly, and I will work with the Assistant General Manager of Bus Operations to provide the same presentation that was provided last week. Thank you very kindly.
Yeah, thank you very much, GM CEO Johnson. And Director Tisdale, I'll just, kind of add to that, yeah, I would refer back to that November 13th meeting and presentation as the update. And this certainly is one of those situations, much like our APTA peer review of our paratransit services, where we receive the update of where we stand. The full recommendations and report will then be coming forward with the board having discussed and been updated where we are. And then prior to anything that this board would need to adopt, there would be further discussion and recommended action. And unfortunately, just where we sit in the year and the transition here, we had the update on progress in November 13th. There will probably be a little bit of repeating of that as we transition to several new board members next year, and then be getting further updates once that report is disseminated in December. So just to kind of highlight a little bit of where we are in the year there. So thank you, General Manager and CEO Johnson, for that. Director Tisdale, Does that answer your questions? And please go ahead for any follow-up.
Yes, and I thank you very much. And I apologize. I did not realize that at the ops committee there had been this presentation, and that's my own fault for not monitoring that meeting. I was not available to audit that committee meeting, and I appreciate very much the update. It is an important discussion that we've had ongoing for a long time, so I will now make a point of going back and reviewing the operations and safety committee meeting, safety and security meeting on November 13th. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Director Tisdale. I appreciate that. Any further questions or comments about the agenda before we take the vote? All right, seeing none, I will call for the vote. Are there any no votes on moving the agenda forward? Seeing none, with the movement is Guzman, the second is Catlin. That will pass with 5 yes votes, 0 no, and 0 abstentions. We do have 2 discussion items followed by other matters. Thank you for the efficiency of the meeting here as we are working through a lot of things. The first discussion item that is on our agenda is the monthly government relations report for November 2024. Mr. Michael Davies, our Government Relations Officer, thank you for your patience in being with us. I'll now yield the floor to you to make a presentation, sir.
Thank you, Chair and members of the committee. As introduced, Michael Davies, Government Relations Officer. I have a brief report for you, starting at the federal level, and it has been noted in previous reports. Currently, the federal government is running on a continuing resolution of appropriations from Congress. That continuing resolution expires December 20th. There's not a clear path on what Congress is going to do, whether they're going to extend another continuing resolution or find full funding. But certainly the tea leaves kind of indicate that it's leading toward another continuing resolution after December 20th. And so we'll keep the board up to date on that. And just as a reminder, continuing resolutions do have an impact on USDOT's ability to put out a full year of funding for RTD to be drawn down, as well as has impacts on competitive grant solicitations that are offered to agencies around the country. Lastly, in the written report at the federal level, I had noted some speculation about appointees that the press had been again speculating on for the appointment to the USDOT secretary. And like a lot of speculation, that's just what it was, speculation, and it was completely wrong. President-elect Trump did nominate former Congressman, Wisconsin Congressman Sean Duffy to that position. That congressman, when serving in Congress, did not serve on any of the committees of jurisdiction on transportation and largely focused on the Financial Services Committee within the House, but does have some bills that were passed with regards to transportation matters, mostly in the trucking industry, that were incorporated into the current surface transportation program or reauthorization bill, rather. So we'll continue to keep the board up to date as more officials, presidential appointee positions at USDOT are announced over the coming months. Moving over to the state level, not a lot of updates really at the state level. Leaders at the General Assembly have just been organizing, electing leadership, and starting to get prepared for next session. No new legislation has come across my desk to make the board aware of. The one thing that's not included in the written report that did come about in between writing that report and now is that the Legislative Audit Committee has scheduled a meeting on December 9th to hear a bill with regards to the Office of the State Auditor's recommendations. And one of those recommendations was to alter the definition of operating expenses for RTD. RTD largely agreed with that recommendation, and it just aligns the definition of operating expenses with how RTD reports at the federal level as well. So very small change, but the actual bill will be heard by the Legislative Audit Committee on December 9th. and RTD staff intends to participate in partnership with the Office of the State Auditor for that hearing. Moving to the local level, just to note, we continue to have arrange engagement opportunities at the local level. And I just note on October 24th, board members as well as General Manager and CEO Johnson and myself attended the North Area Transportation Alliance meeting, or NATA meeting, and provided an update to that group up there, which is a group of elected officials from largely the Adams County area. And certainly some engagement opportunities with the Metro mayors are on the horizon here as they're organizing and really thinking toward 2025. So with that, I'll end my report and see if there's any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Davies, for all of that, and as always for your collaboration. Before opening up for questions, I would be remiss if I didn't note, I just want to thank, broadly, while we're talking about government relations, we had a lot of local and state officials that were very supportive of this agency through the ballot initiative or ballot question that 7A that this board unanimously referred for the debrucing of RTD's revenue sources, which passed by approximately 71% of the vote district-wide. So I just wanted to, before opening up for questions for Mr. Davies, express my immense gratitude for the tremendous support of transit funding, transit resources, and RTD services that we saw from many of the mayors, the county commissioners, chambers of commerce, legislators, really many people, and certainly would thank our own Second Vice Chair Geisinger for her continued work championing that, organizing that, engaging in what was very much a grassroots effort and working with many of those officials. And certainly a thank you to all directors who, when working closely with Second Vice Chair Geisinger and often at her direction and great help, seeking some of that support and assistance from those elected officials in what was truly a grassroots and lean effort. So thank you to Second Vice Chair Geisinger, and thank you to any who may be listening on that government relations front for their support and help of the agency. With that being said, and thank you for allowing me to take a little bit of Chair's prerogative there to highlight that. I know let's come back around to Mr. Davies' government relations report there on the local, state, and federal level. Thank you for providing all of that. I'll open up to any questions that directors may have to you, starting with Secretary Guzman.
Thank you. I am curious. I have heard different discussions around what we are going to look at going into this legislative session in terms of funding, walking into a pretty severe deficit on the state level. Are we aware of how that might impact RTD in terms of the provisions that were made for funding Zero Fare for Youth through the Senate bill that was passed last year, which needs to be reapproved annually, is my understanding of how that bill worked, and reapportioned properly. And do you have an update maybe on what the state of that particular bill is, or where we're at with it? Because I know we were going through the process of collecting, and then how do you fund it out, and how we participate in that process, keeping the commitment to the bill to be able to draw down any of those funds. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary. Mr. Davies, please.
Yeah, thank you, Director Guzman, for the question. It's a great question. And for background, so the grant program that funds the Zero Fare for Youth, that is set in law and that will stay in place. You are correct. It needs to be, appropriated on an annual basis because the General Assembly has never found a funding source that is continuous. It does require another appropriation. Unlike last year, and this connects to your reference on the state budget and being a little bit tighter than last year. But last year, the governor did include funding in his budget recommendation for this purpose. This year, that is not included. So I think from what I know, that is an indication of how tight the state budget is this year and how much room they're going to have for discretionary amounts to be able to plug in. And I think it's just going to be a conversation with the long bill the Joint Budget Committee. And, as outlined in the 2025 Legislative and Government Relations Program, that of course is a priority for us and something that we will be advocating for. And additionally, just to note, funding from last year was enough to be able to carry the program through January of 2026. So really the amount of funding to keep it going all the way through, say, August of 2026 and get that full year of funding is a little less than what it was for a full year of funding in 2024. And I'll just note that. But yeah, you are correct. It is a tight budget year, and we will all have to work together to try to see if we can find some change in the couch cushions there.
Thank you, Mr. Davies. All the more reason I'm appreciative that we were successful in the ballot initiative that was referred for 7A with regards to our own funding. Secretary Guzman, further questions?
One more. We can certainly follow up on this offline. However, each area of the city and county of Denver, as I am a director fully located within one county, I bring this before you to ask, do you know how we are working with the city's vision for the future? There's a near northwest, near northeast, near southeast, near southwest, and a central plan that have been the basis of the work of the Denver City Council in particular. And I am certain this is happening in other cities as well. I'm just more intimately aware of what's going on in Denver, and how that may affect, given their focus on additional dwelling units, increased transit-oriented development plans, and how they are rezoning major parts of the city, particularly in the southeast area near Cherry Creek and Glendale, how that is either impacting or influencing what we do here, and are we part of those conversations, given that in the next 10 to 20 years or sooner, depending on how fast they get some of this built, because the rezoning has flown through city council, the work has been done, so they are ready to move on it very quickly. RTD's planning, service, and delivery throughout the city and county of Denver.
Thank you, Secretary. Mr. Davies, please.
Yeah, thank you, Director Guzman. Another great question. Generally, staff at RTD does interact very closely with the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure at the city, and often that is some of our best avenue for being able to understand what studies are happening and what impact might potentially have for RTD. I don't know of any direct requests with regards to those studies or the outcomes of them, and translating to a direct request for RTD related to service. But I would just say that it is certainly the intent of our interactions with DOTI staff to essentially constantly keep the door open to those discussions. I would just say, thank you for raising it. I will certainly look into it further and see if there's anything that we can participate in greater. But I would also just note that those are the perfect opportunities that we really want to align, not only Denver, but any city study. Aurora is doing a large citywide transportation. Douglas County is doing a transportation study. Boulder County. Really want to align all of those kind of studies with our comprehensive operational analysis process, and we'll kind of keep working at that path.
I just have to say thank you, because that was what I was hoping to hear, and I'm really excited to hear you say that. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question, Secretary. Thank you for the answers, Mr. Davies. Further questions for Government Relations Officer Davies at this time? All right, seeing none, as always, thank you for the organized report, for the advocacy, and for coordinating on multiple fronts on the state, local, and federal level on behalf of the agency here. Thank you so much. All right, we'll now move to our second and final discussion item, with the only remaining agenda item after this being other matters. The discussion item we're moving to now is the meeting accessibility pilot policy review. And at this time, I'll ask Mr. Jack Kroll, our Executive Manager of the Board Office, to please go ahead and present the item.
Thank you, Chair Davidson. Again, Jack Kroll, Executive Manager of the Board Office. So way back in February of this year, you all approved a pilot policy with respect to accessibility that called for the provision of CART services and that the CART services provided can be translated into Spanish. That is to be provided at every meeting of the board. This gave the board office an opportunity to assess over a limited time frame the usefulness of this technology. It was thought that there would be greater demand from the public for this, not to say that there isn't demand or need from the public for these services. We just did not receive any specific requests throughout the time frame to provide CART services to members of the public. As you read out at the beginning of every meeting, anyone who is a committee chair, and the chair of the board reads out that these services are available. We just didn't get much interest from the public. That being said, there are several directors who use it. Upwards of 20% of all current directors are using this service. Given that it is a very valuable tool to the board, separate and apart from the pilot policy, the board office has endeavored on a procurement process and has settled on an agreement with a vendor to continue to provide CART services for the foreseeable future. As such, this policy is set to expire at the end of this year, but in reality, the practice of continuing to provide the service will continue. When you all approved your work plan, you asked for a revisiting of this pilot policy in November, and that's what we're doing here. But again, the bottom line up front here is that the practice will continue of providing CART into the foreseeable future, and there's really no further action that the board needs to take to ensure that for the next few years.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kroll, for presenting that. Thank you for your work on this and for putting forward some information about how well utilized these things are. I think that's helpful to inform future practice. And as always, the discussion item before further action, I think, is very, very helpful, and we appreciate your commitment to that. So I'll open up for questions to Mr. Kroll regarding the policy and the outcome. Secretary Guzman, please go ahead. You're now recognized.
Thank you. I am one of the directors that uses the service, especially the translation to Spanish, quite a bit. Use it both in communicating after our meetings to community about items that were discussed, as it's already translated and I don't have to do that work again. It saves me quite a bit of time, but also just to keep up with the meetings. Sometimes it's a medium difficult conversation to have as a non-native English speaker. And so I want to thank you for giving us the opportunity to do this. I will say one of the troubles that I've had, I get asked a lot about the possibility of doing this, but figuring out an easier way for folks to get that information. And despite my best efforts, I am certain that me sharing my public allowed link, hey, here's this, you can jump on and it's accessible, does not help you continue to figure out how many people are using it. But I know at least 2 of my constituents do follow along on the Spanish translation with me. And so it's just got to be a different way of doing that. So that's just one comment on how we do that, because by the time we figure out our meetings and get into it, then we've started and they're trying to access stuff. I don't always have that CART link available beforehand, and it's too difficult when we are in action to be able to send out an email to them, email this person and wait for a response. It didn't work well this year. One other thing, we had discussed the transcripts of the meetings, which is pretty awesome. I mean, we're doing real-time transcription. And so it was my understanding that this was being done by 2 different sources. And now by continuing this through one vendor, we will eliminate residual cost to the agency by going with one single transcription service. Is that correct? That's really the question I'm getting at.
Yeah, thank you, Secretary. Mr. Kroll, please go ahead, sir.
Yeah, I'll just quickly respond to your first notion and comment around the availability or the public awareness of this resource. That was something the board had asked the board office to do back in February when this was approved was to promote this a little bit more. So now we have at the top of the board's website information that clearly spells out how to request accessibility services. It also appears at the bottom of every board agenda. And one of the things that we have discussed internally and is something that we can consider when we bring online a new board packet software, hopefully within the next quarter to 6 months, is that we can add some additional information with respect to the transcript streams or the cart service streams on the actual agenda. So we would then eliminate that step of needing to reach out to us. But that's something that's on our radar for an improvement in the future. And then, yes, correct. I think a lot of credit on your final point there, Director Guzman, goes to board office staff, specifically Jillian Knapp-Rhodes and Taishre Parrish, as well as Marie Snell, who came to me earlier this year and pointed out the fact that if we sort of paused 2 separate procurements that were ongoing and combined them, we could realize some significant cost savings by having one firm take the CART transcript and turn it into a final transcript as opposed to having 2 separate transcript providers. So a lot of credit goes to the staff on that one. And, while the cost savings isn't anything that is going to amount to even, change we might pull up from underneath the sofa around here, it is nonetheless cost savings. And I'm grateful for the staff for their good public service in that regard.
Thank you, Mr. Kroll. And thank you, Secretary, for the comments and the question there. Does that anything further, Secretary? Great. Any further questions or comments from directors? Okay, well, I certainly invite everybody to provide feedback to Mr. Kroll as it may occur to you, and Mr. Kroll, and thank you to you and your whole team, Ms. Knapp-Rhodes, Ms. Parrish, and Ms. Snell for really working on this and pushing this forward. So thank you very much. That's been helpful this year, I know. Thank you. All right, not seeing any other hands raised, we will conclude our discussion items and move into other matters. Before opening up to everybody for other matters, I'd just like to note it is with a heavy heart that I say this is my final executive committee meeting, not only as chair of the RTD Board of Directors, but as a director on the RTD board. 4 years in some ways can take a long time, but also in some ways go very quickly. It has been a true honor and a privilege to serve this executive committee, to serve this board of directors, to serve this agency, and to serve most of all the public and those who utilize the system. I think I'll save many of my comments for the board meeting, which will be my final meeting as chair, but would just encourage the directors that are continuing here and those coming in and our staff to continue a lot of the great work looking at how we ensure that this agency is not only successful in the short term, but in the long term as well. How we take care of our assets, how we have a strong financial position despite or given whatever resources that we have available to us, and how we make sure that this is a system that's effectively serving our customers today, tomorrow, and for generations, which is one of the unique challenges I think we face as public servants. And I wanted to just share something that when I was first appointed to this position, and the person who had suggested that I should put my name forward when there was a vacancy had said to me that when you take a penny, and that's referring to the 1% sales tax we have here, and divide it over 3 million, approximately the number of people who are in this region, it's very hard to get everybody to be happy, everybody to get what they want. But it's very, very important that when we take that penny and divide it up, we do so very thoughtfully. And we do so to serve the people who need us most, that we do so in a way that is responsible and ensures that that penny goes as far as we can possibly get it without over leveraging ourselves, where we will start to struggle years ahead. This agency has been historically highly financially leveraged, and that's because of the great ambition that we had in 2004 when the voters chose to embark on fast tracks and to build a fairly large system. I've been saying it a lot lately, and perhaps overstating it, but with $9 billion of fixed assets and being around $5 billion at the net appreciation of that, we have a tremendous and great system that we've built out and used, but we have also borrowed quite a bit of money and quite a bit of responsibility in the years ahead to take care of those assets and make sure people can benefit from them. There's been a lot of great work over the past couple of years at this agency to make sure that we are in an enhanced, stable position. Several years ago, we were looking at a reality where fast tracks would likely be running a deficit and be siphoning funds from the base system to continue forward. We're no longer looking at that. We've done a lot of great work, I think, to, while we're at that, actually be cutting fares for the first time in agency history, introducing zero fares for youth, increasing wages on the front line several years ago, and shoring up our pension obligations and refinancing a lot of debt. So we have managed to stabilize this agency when many of our peers have become destabilized by the crises we've faced, while also adopting things beneficial for customers. I ask this board, I ask this staff to take a moment, reflect on those successes and reflect on what's going well, and continue the good work. I think it's often really difficult for us as human beings to see that things sometimes can be bad in one area and getting better in another area. And it's always important to ask what could be better and how to double down and really fix things. And what's getting better, even if it's not where we want it to be, what's improving, and how to double down on those investments to get that improvement to go even further. I know we have a lot of people on staff that have the ability to really drive that forward. I know we have that capability within this board. I am very sad that I will no longer be a part of that journey. I will see you out on the system, and I just encourage you all to continue a lot of that good work and focus. So that concludes comments I wanted to make in other matters. Thank you for indulging me, and thank you very sincerely for trusting me with the opportunity to serve you all as your chair this year. I will miss you all a great deal. With that, I'll open up for any other matters that folks may have, and I see Second Vice Chair Geisinger, your hand is raised. Please go ahead.
I'll just save some comments for the board meeting or dinner or something, but just couldn't let that go without saying thank you so much. We've worked closely together, and I know you have with others on this committee and the board, and you've brought really a level of dedication and smarts and work that has been unmatched, and thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Director Geisinger. I appreciate it. It's been a privilege and will be a highlight, I know, when I look back. First Vice Chair Catlin, please.
Thank you, and I would like to echo Director Geisinger's comments. It's been a privilege to serve with you on this executive committee. Well done, sir.
Thank you, Director Catlin. I appreciate it. Treasurer Bouquet, please.
I'll have quite a bit more words to give during the last board meeting with you, Director Davidson, but it's been an honor serving with you. And again, you took over as chair during some pretty chaotic times and pretty hard times. And I have to just salute you for everything that you've done and been able to continue the stability for not only this board, but this agency. But I'll have a lot more words for you during our last board meeting together. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Treasurer. I very much appreciate the sentiments. Secretary Guzman, please.
I get to put the seal on the document, so I'm going to put the seal on this. Thank you. You have been a tremendous leader in this committee and on the board, working with you and following you. Being able to partner with you on thoughts and get work done has been tremendous, and I don't know how you do it some days. I'm knocked out by the time we have most of our conversations, and somehow it's invigorating and it gets me working for another 2 hours. I'm probably gonna have a caffeine cliff at some point where I won't be able to do it anymore, but it's been awesome working with you, and I am sad to see you go, but I have you on speed dial, so you know, if you're ever up late and you need to have a conversation, you can also call me too.
thank you, Secretary. I appreciate the sentiments, and thank you to all of you. Truly, it has been an honor, and I'm not going anywhere. I'm not leaving Colorado, and love this system. I'll be out on it and care deeply about the agency. So certainly, you all know where to find me, and hope you do find me as you desire. Any other matters? Mr. Kroll, please go ahead, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Davidson. Way back in August, the OSA put out its recommendations relative to the performance audit it conducted this year. And one of the things that they flagged was that the board should focus and a recommendation that we agreed to, I should add, that the board should focus on continuing education. You all approved your policy last month with respect to board member orientation, onboarding, and continuing education. And one of the things that calls for annually is for the board office to survey subject matter experts at the agency, as well as board members, to inform the executive committee in setting a roadmap for continuing education for the subsequent year. The policy dictates that conversation should happen at the November meeting of the executive committee every year. Obviously, with the policy being approved at the end of October, there wasn't enough time to survey board members and subject matter experts for this year and have that conversation at this meeting. However, I don't want to miss an opportunity to continue the good work here. And I just wanted to take a moment here to let you all know that the board office will be surveying the board to get some input on continuing education topics for next year. And we'll be asking the executive committee to weigh in on some of that. We can do some of that via email, and that will provide a roadmap for next year's board to set some study sessions at the outset of the year for continuing education. I do want to recognize and thank, we did survey subject matter experts within the agency and have already received some really great feedback. I haven't had an opportunity yet to connect with GM and CEO Johnson on the responses that we got, so it's a bit premature to jump into those. But just to say, there's a lot of great ideas circulating on how we can continue to educate board members here at the agency.
Thank you, Mr. Kroll, for highlighting that, and thank you to you and your team for leading the way on that. I know with the board assessment coming forward and these opportunities to weigh in on training. Thank you for leading that, and I encourage all directors to please lean into that and engage with Mr. Kroll and his team on the items that should be there for continuing education, and also providing feedback on how to further improve the operations of the board. Thank you, Mr. Kroll. Are there any other matters? All right, not seeing at this time, I'll note a few things here. So this is the last executive committee meeting scheduled for this year. The next scheduled executive committee meeting will be in January 2025. There will actually be 2 executive committee meetings in January 2025. The first of which will be scheduled shortly after the first meeting of the year. And that will be when the executive committee determines committee assignments for the year of 2025. Thank you to everybody for participating in this meeting, as always, for the engagement in all of the discussions and questions. I fare you well on this committee. And once again, it has been a pleasure. And seeing no other discussion at this time, I will adjourn the meeting as of 1:44 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. Please take care. Bye-bye.